Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Connect with us on social media. On YouTube, subscribe to our channel at Grade Level Reading. On LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, follow us at Campaign for GLR. And on X, follow us at Reading by Third. Please use the hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to reshare. We encourage you to post any questions, reflections, or observations on social media. Once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be working behind the scenes to help produce the conversation. Before we jump in, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge our enterprise and our programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connections, and build the CGLR community. I also want to give special thank you to our Leo sustaining sponsors, so you'll see on this screen here. Thank you for your support and engagement in allowing us to have these weekly webinars. And before we jump in, hold on, I just want to make sure that we're recording this great conversation that's about to take place. There we go. Okay. Oops, there we go. But yes, before we begin, I do want to share a few housekeeping details. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself. So please share your name, city, or state, and your organization in the chat box. Use that chat box at the bottom of the screen and be sure when you're responding to select everyone so that we can all see who is here, and feel free to share your thoughts and insights throughout the webinar. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the webinar to respond to those questions you post, and our panelists will be typing out answers throughout the webinar itself. The conversation is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook, and a link to the recording as well as all slides, bios, and resources will be sent in a follow-up email to all who registered. I also want to give a quick flag that we will be posting a brief poll right towards the end of the webinar. We highly encourage you to respond as this helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And before we begin, I did want to turn your attention to some of our upcoming webinars that we have. Next week on January 27th, we have an exciting conversation in our Big Bets Working series with a focus on tutoring. So if you're listening in today, you might have special interest in next week's session. But this conversation will be focused on the Los Angeles settlement, focusing on lost learning during the pandemic. The registration link will be posted in the chat box now. On February 3rd, we have another exciting session. This one will be for this one will be about the federal education tax credit and the different opportunities and challenges that states are facing. And on February 10th, as part of our technology enhanced teaching and learning series, we will have Designing for Connection, powering parents to support learning at home and school. Again, all of these great registration links and more information will be posted in the chat, and we hope that you can join us. And I promise, the last thing before we jump into our great conversation, I just want to make sure that you are all aware that CGLR has officially launched our Decoding NAEP report on our website. This report synthesizes the insights shared by 50 education thought leaders during our Decoding NAEP webinars. The report examines the 2024 NAEP results and what they tell us about how to boost student achievement and close gaps. The link for that report will be posted in the chat, or you can go ahead and scan that QR code that you see on the screen here. We welcome and encourage any thoughts or insights that you have after reading the report, and we look forward to hearing from you. And finally, without further ado, I am excited to introduce John Gompertz with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, who will take us through the conversation.
Thanks, Sierra, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm glad to see you. This session is a little different, so we especially look forward to your feedback at the end of the session. We'll do a poll, as always, towards the end. So it isn't exactly a news flash to say that high-impact tutoring has become a big thing. It's funny because, as we're going to hear, tutoring isn't exactly a new thing, hardly. And while it's been around for a long while, it hasn't been a big thing, or at least not the way it is right now. So many of us are wondering, what's going to happen going forward? Where are we headed? Over the course of the next 75 minutes or so, we're going to explore and understand how this all happened, where it may be headed, with our special guest, Liz Cohen, who's the author of the new book called The Future of Tutoring. Liz is Vice President for Policy at our partner organization, 50 Can. Liz saw this tutoring story unfolding and developing, and she wrote a terrific book to capture the story, to highlight the successes and the lessons, and to reflect on what it all means. Here's the book. You should get it. I told Liz I would hold it up so she didn't have to. Here it is. It's great. So, as I mentioned, tutoring didn't just burst on the scene out of nowhere. In fact, given what everybody in the audience does, you've probably been thinking about tutoring for a long time, and you have some history of your own with tutoring. My connection with tutoring started in April 1997 when I was the chief of staff at the Corporation for National Service, which is the agency that runs AmeriCorps. On April 27th, 1997, as part of the President's Summit for America's Future, President Clinton visited an elementary school in Philadelphia. This was the only time I was actually in a presidential motorcade. And he announced that he was launching something called America Reads, an effort to recruit and deploy 1 million tutors to help every third grade student read well and independently by the end of third grade. That sound familiar to anybody? Yeah. Well, AmeriCorps was to be in the lead in this effort, along with the Department of Education. And part of the formal launch of America Reads, AmeriCorps pledged to shift its resources in a huge way towards tutoring. Now, at the end of the Clinton administration, I left the agency and was recruited to, yeah, you guessed it, lead a tutoring initiative called Experience Corps, another partner of the campaigns, which was directly aligned with the America Reads effort. Later, I went back to the AmeriCorps agency in the Obama administration, by which time fully two-thirds of the agency's resources were devoted to education, mostly in some form of tutoring. After that, I led America's Promise, the actual organization that was launched back in Philadelphia in April 1997, and I continued to pursue that agenda and the goals that President Clinton, General Colin Powell had laid out. So tutoring has been a through line for me for almost 30 years now. And I suspect many of you have similar stories. Tutoring has been on the mind of the campaign for quite some time, too. I remember talking with our friend Ralph Smith in the spring of 2022. It was the pandemic, and I was out, it was actually 2021. It was the pandemic, and I was out on a long walk, which is how I like to do my meetings. I was walking on New Mexico Avenue in Washington, D.C., when Ralph proclaimed, "You know, what we need to respond to the learning loss that is happening right now, we need a massive national tutoring corps." As we will hear from Liz shortly, it turns out that Ralph's proclamation, or you might say outburst, was right in line with a set of big developments that fed into the explosion of tutoring in the wake of and in response to the learning loss that the pandemic brought. Since that time, the campaign has devoted a lot of time and energy to exploring, understanding, and ultimately promoting tutoring. Tutoring has become one of our big bets. We've held nearly 20 GLR Learning Tuesday events on tutoring. But, but we've never had a book event on the topic. And because we're all about closing gaps, we're going to close that particular gap today. Last week, I asked you for your favorite books of 2025, and today we're going to have a GLR Learning Tuesday book event. We aren't Oprah or Good Morning America just yet, but maybe we'll become an important stop on the promotion track for authors. So, Liz, why don't you come on? Thanks for joining us. Here's how this little event is going to go. I'm going to ask Liz a few questions to get out the essence of the book. Then we've asked some leaders from the GLR network, national and community partners, to join to pose some questions to Liz. And I will work to weave in questions from the audience to the best of my ability. So put your questions in the Q&A box. Don't wait till the end. As soon as they strike you, put them in there and we'll try to work them in. Okay? Thanks. And let's get started. Liz, I'm just so happy you wrote this book. I'm delighted. But you're not a reporter. and you're not an academic. You're not really a writer per se. So, how did this happen? What's the origin story? How'd you decide to write this book?
I love that you started with that because it's a big discussion in my house. My youngest son, who's 10, says I'm not really an author because it's not my job. And I'm like, there's a whole stack of books in my house now with my name on it. So I think I get to be an author forever. But, I'm going to just start with that. So, I mean, look, I've been working in education policy and research for 20 years now, more than 20 years, actually. And spent most of my career kind of working at the intersection of data and policy. How do we collect and analyze data in ways that's meaningful for policymakers? And I've done this, had the opportunity to do this at a district, at a state, at the federal government for consultants, all sorts of things. So I'd kind of been around for a minute. And at the time in 2020, there was sort of this remarkable moment where in the summer of 2020, when it became clear that many schools, especially in blue states, weren't going to reopen fully in the fall, that we were going to need to do something. And tutoring just sort of, was sort of this thing. Everyone's like, we probably need to do tutoring. We probably need to do tutoring. Probably will do some tutoring. And I think, in that there's this quote that Michael Duffy wrote that had just been shown on the screen where he said that it moved from the sidelines to the center. And I think that, and what you're saying too, right, John, is that lots of folks have been involved in tutoring. And the private tutoring market, by the way, has been booming for a long time. In the 2000s, the number of private tutoring centers in the country tripled. So we know that for a long time now, parents with means have been accessing the kind of personalized instruction that you get through tutoring. And then all of a sudden in COVID, people were like, maybe we need to do something. Then there was all this money available. And it was just really remarkable because everyone seemed to agree. And that never happened. So I was already kind of interested in it from that standpoint. And then in in 2023, I was actually at the time working at a research center at Georgetown called Future Ed, and we had gotten a grant to write some case studies about high impact tutoring. And I'll be honest, when I first got this assignment, my actual reaction was, we're still on this tutoring thing? Because that's typically how this stuff goes, right? It gets
Yeah.
trendy for a couple years and then we move on. And I'd already been doing tutoring for like 2.5 years. And I was like, okay. So I started talking to districts. I had this list of 10 or 12 places to talk to who I'd heard were doing interesting work. Uh, and usually, if you've ever tried to write case studies, you talk to 10 or 12 places and it's pretty clear that 2 or 3 of them are doing something worthwhile. And that's what you write about because that's what you're getting paid to do. And what happened was that every place I talked to was doing something worthwhile. All of these districts and
Wow.
charter schools and state organizations were trying to follow the evidence, trying to define exactly what high quality, high dosage, high impact tutoring is. They were trying to get it to as many kids as possible. They were trying to really pay attention to implementation. And I thought, huh, this is just, there's something more here than the sum of its parts. And as someone who I think, like all of us, right, got into this work in particular because we care about education as an engine of opportunity and economic mobility, and how do we get opportunities to lower income communities and kids, who might not otherwise, all of a sudden, all across the country. I mean, according to the US Department of Education School Pulse Panel survey data, by May 2023, 80% of school districts in America reported offering tutoring, and 2/3 of those said specifically they were doing high impact tutoring that didn't even exist a few years before. So I just was like, there is something here. And I felt like because I had been talking to all these folks and I'd always secretly had a bucket list thing about writing a book. So I wrote
There
a
you
book about
go.
it.
There you go. Well, part of it, you mentioned some history. Part of what I loved about your book is you provide some pretty deep background on tutoring and teaching and learning, which helps set the context for what's going on today. Can you take us a little into the Wayback Machine and tell us about the long ago history of tutoring, so we all have some shared background?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so tutoring, I mean, has been around forever, right? I mean, famously, Aristotle was a tutor. Someone joked that the title of the book should have been Tutoring, the Second Oldest Profession. It's part of our history,
Yeah.
right? Even here in this country, up until the 19th century, it's how affluent white boys were prepared for university by working with tutors. Um, if you've ever, my daughter's favorite book is Little Women, right? So Laurie is working with his tutor, of course, ends up marrying Meg, lots of hijinks to follow. But anyways, tutoring has always been part of it. And then in the 1900s, we started talking about how to really democratize access to public education. And folks like, ultimately folks like John Dewey and others would say, in order to prioritize access, we got to get rid of this tutoring thing because there's just no way to scale it. They didn't say scale in like 1897, but that's essentially the gist, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and so it really just got pushed to the side in favor of sort of the traditional classroom model that we are all very familiar with. And I think that was mostly the case for a lot of the 20th century. Um, by the end of the 20th century, of course, we had some tutoring, right? And, you referenced President Clinton's initiative to start introducing the idea of tutoring, and we had tons still of private tutoring. And so then this kind of dancing around, and then some of I talk about this in the book, but then you had, for instance, Match Charter School in Boston, which started around in the early 2000s. I think I saw Alan Safran is on the call today, so he could tell this better than I will. But I'll just say, like, they were the first school to try to embed tutoring into the school day using AmeriCorps. And really trying to push the idea of, is there an opportunity to bring this kind of personalized instruction that supports kids alongside their learning on a regular basis into the school day? And I think that they incubated a ton of great, ideas and concepts of what tutoring could look like today. And then 20 years later, all of a sudden we have this pandemic. And it turns out that one of the big things that happened in the pandemic was that every kid was having a different experience. So they were coming back to the classroom with a different set of needs. And I think that tutoring really fit that moment of being able to deliver. But the really big thing, right, or one really big thing that had shifted, even since that story you told about President Clinton, to be honest, was the internet. And the
That
fact
thing.
that we are able to start delivering a lot of tutoring virtually, which is kind of ironic because obviously when schools went virtual, it was very chaotic and not at all successful. But it turns out that we learned pretty quickly that you can, in fact, deliver very high quality, high impact tutoring in a virtual setting, as long as sort of all the definitions of a consistent adult at least 3 times a week for at least 30 minutes, aligned with great curriculum, those conditions are met. It doesn't matter so much if it's in person or online. So all of a sudden, I think my guess is, right, that having looked at the Clinton era initiative a little bit, that a lot of the challenge around trying to scale that was the human capital aspect of it.
Sure,
But some
sure.
of that pressure gets released when you can use the internet and things like that. So anyways, and then we had these researchers like Susanna Loeb at
Yeah,
Stanford.
yeah, let me ask that. I'm fascinated by sort of this thing about how a thing becomes a thing. How does something burst on the scene? And what we probably know is it's a lot of stuff. It's not just one thing, it's a lot of stuff. So can you describe what that lot of stuff was, who was
Yeah,
involved, what happened, that all of a sudden tutoring went from, as Michael said in that quote, went from the sidelines to the center. What I know what happened, with the pandemic, but what
sure.
happened
No, no.
with this field?
I think there were a handful of trusted experts who were frankly willing to stake a lot of their relationship on this new idea of tutoring and whether it could work. And I think that includes the late Bob Slavin, who
Yeah,
passed
sure.
away in April 2021. But in 2020, I mean, he was one of the first people out there very publicly saying we need a Marshall Plan. It's got to be tutoring. This is the thing. And he had spent his career focused on that. And up until he very suddenly passed away, he was working on bringing together all sorts of organizations who could touch tutoring in any way. So there was Bob, there was Susanna Loeb, who's an economist who had been at Brown and was back at Stanford, who also just said, this seems like something I could work on. And she just sort of turned herself into this tutoring expert and started really trying to gather evidence and really try to create more sort of short cycle feedback, evaluations, and data, and helping people figure out, like, what do we actually know works. And she, I think, was willing to stake some of her relationship. You had folks like Kevin Huffman, who had been the state commissioner in Tennessee, and he'll say, I was sitting at home in Tennessee and I was like, this is a crisis I have never seen in our lifetime. He didn't know anything about tutoring, but he started reading about it, and then agreed to run this new organization called Accelerate that would go on to give a lot of sort of seed grants to partnerships between states and tutoring organizations and districts and tutoring organizations, again, to get a lot of this effort off the ground, based in evidence provided by Susanna and Bob Slavin's team and his wife Nancy at Johns Hopkins and all sorts of folks like that. So I think a lot of it was that the experts were willing to stake some of their credibility and relationship and really go all in.
I love that. Let's do, as we get further into this conversation, Liz, let's do a little definitional work. You
Yep.
flew by it quickly, but tutoring is a term that covers lots of different activities in lots of different settings. You zero in on high impact tutoring. So I want to ask what is high impact tutoring? And also I want to ask, why do you say high impact instead of high dosage? You cover this in the book, and I think it's really important.
So, okay, so the gold standard, and I want to be clear that we can talk lots of ways about, like, is there a silver standard and a bronze standard? But the gold standard of what the evidence suggests leads to the best outcomes is tutoring that is no more than 4 students to a consistent adult. So if I'm the tutor, I am always the tutor in every session with the same children.
Mm-hmm.
We're meeting at least 3 times a week for at least 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a specific goal, and it's tied to what the kids are learning in school. So it's not homework help, but it is tied to, okay, right now we're trying to master fractions, and we know these kids are struggling with fractions. There's some fungibility. It doesn't have to be that you use the exact curriculum, but like generally there is alignment there. Beyond that, it turns out there's a lot of other flexibility about sort of timing, about who can be a tutor, about all these other pieces, the modality stuff I mentioned, that can happen in different ways, and can still kind of get you where you're going. And I think that, if you look at what we're seeing now, also, there's a lot of playing around with, some folks are doing twice a week for 45 minutes. Is that going to get you the same as 30 minutes for 5 days a week? I mean, no, but like we also live in the real world where there's like resource constraints and all sorts of
Yep.
stuff like that. But anyway, so that's kind of like the main point there. The high impact versus high dosage, it's so funny. So, I mean, some of it is a little bit dealer's choice, like what do you like calling it? I had stuck with high impact because part of what excited me about it was the impact, right? I mean, the evidence suggests that this kind of tutoring in this definition is the most effective tool that we have to advance student learning. And we have seen that when compared against almost every other kind of school type intervention. Roland Fryer did a study now more than 10 years ago where he looked in Houston, looking at tutoring, looking at class size reduction, teacher training, all these different pieces, and tutoring gets all of it. So I was really excited about the impact. But one of the things that I've come to realize, especially in the last, I would say, 18 months, is that, no surprise, the implementation is the thing that matters most. And the single most important part of implementation with tutoring is the dosage. So actually, like, I'm pretty cool if you want to call it high dosage tutoring, to constantly remind people that if you do not get the dosage, you will not get the outcomes. I've actually started using that term myself sometimes, because while I care about the impact, you have to have the dosage, and that is the single hardest piece when it comes to implementation. And where we see, if you are running a tutoring program or you're looking at tutoring data and you see, oh, these are disappointing results, like, I guarantee you the thing that happened is the kids didn't get the dosage.
Okay, interesting. Now we have a question already, which is, how do you think about, you mentioned, is there a silver standard? Is there a bronze standard? I ran Experience Core. We were not 3 times a week, 30 minutes a time. So how do you feel about, after all your observations, how do you feel about programs that are less intense in various ways, more volunteer driven, et cetera?
Sure. I think that the most important thing about, when I think about tutoring, is that it's not really about like I'm not out there being like everyone should be tutoring. I am out there saying everyone needs a strategy and a plan for how to support kids who need additional help, which is probably in some schools it's every kid, and in some schools it's a handful of kids. And if tutoring is the tool that you're using and the strategy that you're going into, like let's talk about what you're really trying to achieve. And I think that the amount that you're willing to put in, is in a certain way going to tell you what you get. As my husband's late grandfather used to always say, you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
So if you're working with kids who are significantly behind and they're also disengaged and all sorts of other things and really struggling in the classroom, like you might want to say, hey, for the next 6 to 8 weeks with this group of kids, we want 4 days a week. We want it to be in this way because we're trying to get these specific outcomes, and that's what we think. If, like a lot of schools right now, you're like, we would love to do that. Well, we don't got the money. But what we can do is run a program that is twice a week and uses volunteer tutors. And the truth is, you can get results with that, right? I mean, in 2000, again, the year 2000, 26 years ago, there was a study done in the state of Oregon, my home state, where they used volunteer tutors. It was actually run by the business community, and they provided twice a week early literacy tutoring with kindergartners. People from the business community showed up and read to kindergartners. And
Mhm.
by and large, the kids who were in that program not only were better readers, they were also learning at a faster rate in class by the end of the program. So, all to say, you can get great results with a lot of different program design. What I would really encourage schools and districts to think about is what are we trying to achieve? What do we want to say that we got for the money and time and resources that we're putting in? And like, what do our money
Yeah.
and time and resources allow?
Fair, fair. There's this sort of picture, and I think a lot of people's had to volunteer tutoring and reading with kids, just as you said, this business group deployed people to read with kids. And on the other hand, when you did the definitional work around high impact tutoring, it was aligned to curriculum. So there's the dosage question, but then there's also this, like, what's actually going on in this 30-minute session question. How
Yep.
important is that, do you think?
This is like the Schrodinger's cat of questions because I think it's like both important and not important. It depends a lot on what you're doing. Like if
Okay.
you're talking about early literacy tutoring, honestly, and you're just trying to work with kindergarten, first graders and getting them over those like initial phonics where we know, by the way, that like more opportunities to read aloud, to get feedback on reading, like these are all things that we know are great for helping kids learn to read.
Hmm.
It probably matters a little bit less, right? How closely like your tutoring is aligned to the curriculum if the goal is to read. Now, you're going to want some input to make sure you're choosing the right texts, and you're going to want to make sure your tutors know how to support kids if they're stumbling and all these kind of pieces. But some of that kind of work, and it's somewhat similar with early numeracy, if you generally know the topic areas, there's
Hmm.
some fungibility about it. I think if you're working with older kids, if you look, just because I already mentioned Alan, but if you look at like Saga's work with the
Yep.
Algebra 1 in particular, obviously that's a
Yep.
very in class, like in school kind of program. It's going to be directly tied really to exactly what they're working on because it's going to be giving them that kind of ongoing support so that they can master the material they're on right now. And I think also with older kids, that's really important to have that kind of coherence. We know with older students, we also have to be willing to tell them why. Why are we doing this? Why are you doing tutoring? Why are we doing it in this way? And I think when you can give them a coherent answer that these pieces are all connected, it really helps sell it. And then you get the buy in that helps with older kids.
Excellent. So, there's a way in which it all seems obvious when you say it. Like, oh yeah, this is smart and and here's how you do it. Here are the basic things, and you could have a little bit of give and take on this and that. But we know it's actually not that easy to do, and it's not that easy to do at scale. So I'm curious to have a little conversation here about implementation. And I think some of our other guests will have similar kinds of questions. What are some of the warning signs that might suggest, oh, District A here is investing a bunch of money, but this isn't actually going exactly right? What do you
Yeah.
what do you look for?
It's funny phrasing like of the what are the warning signs? Like I often think more about like what are the things I definitely want to see. I want to see someone who's in charge of the program from the district. I want to see
Mm,
someone who a significant part of their job responsibility is
okay, good,
overseeing tutoring implementation. I
good.
think if you don't have leadership at the district, then where do schools go when they have questions? So if there you didn't have that, I would definitely have concerns. I want schools to have an answer on the scheduling of it, like when are you offering the tutoring and how consistent is it? And a lot of elementary schools in particular that have really adopted tutoring as kind of a core practice have moved to a schedule that involves basically a period of the day that's like an intervention block in which some kids are getting tutoring and some might be doing enrichment and some might be doing some other small group.
Hmm.
So you want to see some kind of model like that, or at least an answer to the question, like we have a plan to provide this consistently. And you don't want it to be pulling kids out of tier one instruction for tutoring. That would be a warning sign for sure, because then they're just going to fall further behind. And also then you have a lot of other, when I went to Ector County, Texas, to visit
Hmm.
their tutoring program, and some of the teachers there told me that when they started the program, they were told to identify certain kids who would get the tutoring, and those kids were supposed to kind of go to the back of the class and log on to do their virtual tutoring while other kids were doing something with the teacher that was like kind of enrichment or whatever, but
Hmm.
that it
Hmm.
was both made it very chaotic in the classroom, and the kids who had been singled out for tutoring weren't super engaged in their tutoring sessions.
Hmm.
uh, then the district decided that a better approach would be to say, actually, let's give tutoring to all the kids you think might benefit from it. And then a smaller group will do enrichment. And that meant that almost everyone in the class was now basically doing either tutoring or something almost like tutoring. It took all the stigma out of it, and it made it so that this was just now how the class did it. It was less about
Hmm.
tutoring because, John, you're behind, and more about this is the time of day where we all work on the things that we need to work on. And that's a really different framing for kids. So you don't have to do it that way. And obviously, you need to have the money if you're going to put more kids in tutoring. But I think there are ways to frame the tutoring so that it doesn't feel, like kids are getting singled out and you don't have sort of the stigma attached to it.
Just a heads up, I'm going to turn to our other guests shortly to ask some questions. And I've seen some questions go by, but really to everybody who's listening, I welcome questions at any point in this conversation. Um, Questions around some school districts do this on their own. Some engage with various flavors of providers, or partnerships with nonprofits. What are your observations from looking at, as your book says, 10,000 districts? What are your observations about which approach works, or when does each of those approaches or combination of approaches work best?
So again, I think it starts with the district being clear on what their strategy is, and that involves them knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are, right? So if I, as a district, I'm like, I know we want to do tutoring because we have all these kids that are behind on reading, but we don't have the capacity and we haven't thought about this at all. So then you think about like, well, then do we want to bring in a trusted partner, someone who's been doing this work for years? I think right now there's a lot of incentives for districts to try to do the work in house because they're trying to be more conservative when it comes to spending on it. And I
Hmm.
would say that I think that's probably a pretty tough road if you're just getting started. I would really think about trying to launch a program in partnership with folks who have been doing the work for years. And then if you have to be realistic about, we're going to bring you on for 2 years and then transition to in-house, would we know what we're doing? But I think just trying to be honest from a district perspective about what you know and you don't know, and what you're able to do is important. A lot of it also comes down to being able to have that relationship with principals about what this looks like in the school day so principals in turn can really bring teachers on board. I've by and large found tutoring to be very popular with principals and teachers, but again, that's mostly because I went to districts where the tutoring was going very well, so that obviously is going to create a good feedback loop. But
Sure.
again, you just really want to have that opportunity to build those relationships and have someone who can help troubleshoot the implementation pieces of it, because there's a lot. It's both. So let's say who exactly is going to get tutoring, who's going to be your tutors, how are you thinking about tutor match, what happens if I match John with Emily, and it turns out like that's just not a good pairing, right?
Right.
I mean, that doesn't happen a ton, but it does happen sometimes. So there's a lot of
Sure.
a lot of details go into it. Um, and but again, I really just think that it starts with the district being very clear about what they're trying to accomplish and what they know their own capacity is.
Let me ask about a couple of different modalities. We've been mostly talking in this conversation about in school, during the school day tutoring. Um, and as you suggested at the top of the show, we're most focused on tutoring that is designed to help struggling learners, often kids from low income households that don't have the capacity to go get private tutoring if their kids are struggling in school. Um, so then take that and think about these different modalities. Out of school time, how's tutoring in out of school time? What about virtual tutoring? Those two.
Okay, so I mean, there's some overlap there, but I think out of school time is actually right now where there's the most opportunity for growth in tutoring because I think we haven't, for a lot of reasons, it wasn't the focus, right? In those initial pandemic years, we were trying to figure out like, you know, how do we do this the best? And it felt like being in school meant you were guaranteed access to the kids and all these kinds of
Right.
pieces. But what I'm actually seeing now is tremendous growth in out of school time potential, in after school programs, some of which are virtual. And actually, the kid is at home. Like the school says John's going to be in tutoring, but the tutoring actually happens at home virtually.
Hmm.
But it's with a tutor that is, knows what John needs to be working on. So that I think there's a lot of opportunity for. There's also, I mean, I talked to a district in California. California had put a ton of money into their ELOP, their extended learning opportunity funds, like several $billions. And so this one district decided to essentially make aftercare free for all families. And then they baked high impact tutoring into their aftercare session. Now, if you live in California, you should totally do that. If you live in a state that didn't put 2 billion in it after school, like I don't know, we could figure that out. But I think there's a lot of opportunities now because I think that one of the things happening right now more broadly across education, right, is that we saw so many parents wake up during COVID and realize that their children weren't doing as well in school as they thought they had. That's what has fueled so much of the work, right, around science of reading and the sold a story work and all of that was these parents saying, wait, what's going on with my kids? So I think there's real opportunity to give kids opportunities to get tutoring connected to school in out of school time. And a lot of that is going to happen virtually. And I think that there's been huge progress in that because like I was saying, like we have some evidence and studies that show that it doesn't matter if you're virtual or in person. It really
Yep.
matters that the tutor knows what they're doing.
Yep. Okay. I want to ask one more question, but then I want to just flag for our guests that I'm going to turn to you in just a minute. And I want to continue to encourage people in the audience to post their questions, and we will work those into the conversation. Um, when we talked before, Liz, you said that one of your takeaways from all this work was, wow, we really need to emphasize early learning. And here we are, the campaign for grade level reading. Our metric is third grade reading, early school success. Tell me, what's the connection between all this work on tutoring and your takeaway being, oh, we really need to focus on the early stuff.
Yeah. Well, okay. I guess we're in hot take corner now. This
Hey,
is
you're
not.
on book tour. You're supposed to do
I'm up.
this.
Right. Look, I mean, I don't even think this should be that controversial. We just pass kids from grade to grade, and so the all the things that kids don't learn, like come along with them as stuff they still haven't learned. And both reading and math are essentially hierarchical. If you can't really read well, you're not going to be able to read advanced tests or texts, and if you can't do early math, you're not going to be able to do advanced math. And I think that one of the things that tutoring has shown is that it's the easiest to do in the early grades, frankly. It's the easiest to get buy-in from the kids. It's the easiest to do the scheduling and all of these pieces. And I just increasingly think that if we really committed that every kid by third grade is actually going to be able to comfortably read fluently and comfortably do early math, that that would solve a huge amount of the downstream problems, because trying to work with a seventh grader who's still struggling to read, or a ninth grader who's in algebra 1 but it turns out doesn't understand, basic division, these are things that happen all the time, is much more difficult than deciding to front load some of the costs, um, and baking in tutoring, which is what we are seeing in some states. That is what states like Louisiana are doing with legislation that says that kids who are below grade level have to receive tutoring. There's a bill in the Ohio State legislature right now on math that would require tutoring for any student below third grade who is below grade level on math. I think this is where it would cost a little bit more upfront. We would save tremendously, and we have so many more kids set up for success and ready to really thrive and be the students we all want them to be if we were willing to commit that in these early years, like, you do not move forward. And whether you want that to be third grade or first grade, whatever, we can fight about all those things. Just do not pass go. Do not collect $200 because you're not paying rent on Broadway if you don't know how to read. So.
Yeah. Excellent. Fantastic. That was great, Emily. As you might imagine, I have more questions, but I'm gonna step aside for a minute. I'm gonna invite our guests to come join us. I'm gonna introduce everybody, and then we're gonna get started in having other people pose some questions to you. So here's who's with us. Johnny Blunt is the Director of Collaborative Action for Literacy Mid-South in Memphis. Um, Becca Eastman, who is the director of the Iowa Reading Corps, was going to join us. And then she was struck down by a terrible case of the flu. She was really hoping she was going to get better, but her voice and her cough is not okay. So we're very lucky to have Kelly Sawyer, who's the CEO of the United Ways of Iowa, stepping in for her at the last moment. Sherry Flagg became involved with United Way Central Georgia's reading program uh, as a volunteer. Now she's a 30-year retired educator who has served as principal with Bibb County School District. And Crystal Roundtree leads Jumpstart, which is one of our national partners and a national early education nonprofit where volunteers deliver research-based curriculum to kids in underserved communities. So that's it. That's who we've got with us. And Crystal, I think we'll turn to you for the first question. Well, first of all, Crystal, give us a little, I'm going to ask each of you, so that people know who's asking these questions of Liz. Give us a little bit on Jumpstart, and then we'll ask you to ask your question.
Perfect. Happy to do it. Thank you. It's really great to be here, and I'm so grateful for our longstanding partnership between Jumpstart and CGLR. So Jumpstart is a national early learning nonprofit, and we are focused on ensuring that young children enter kindergarten ready to succeed. So Liz, as you were talking about the early grades, I was like, what if we start even earlier? We work primarily with 3 to 5 year olds in preschool settings, and we're supporting the development of those key language, literacy, and life skills at a moment when the brain is developing rapidly and learning is deeply relational. And so our students are young children who are bringing curiosity and potential from communities where access to strong early learning opportunities hasn't always been available. And what makes our model distinct, I would say, is who sits alongside them. And our tutors have primarily been college students from a variety of majors, though many have been folks who are considering careers in education and child development and social work, or other related fields. And they receive training in early literacy, child development, and relationship-centered practice. And they're supported and coached continuously by our staff as they work in classrooms. And the tutoring at Jumpstart is happening in small groups, embedded into the preschool day. I like to call us a classroom enhancement. And that's happening at least twice a week through the 2 hour Jumpstart session. And it's structured, it's intentional, grounded, as you mentioned, in research-backed, evidence-based practice, but it's also playful and joyful and responsive and rooted in strong relationships and adult-child interactions. And we really do see tutoring not just as an academic intervention, but as a way to build confidence, to strengthen language through those back and forth conversational interactions, and to build a love of learning early on. And Liz, I will say one thing that really resonated with me in your book was how it frames tutoring as not just an emergency intervention, but really as this like core learning strategy. And from where I sit with young young children who are on the ground with their tutors, that distinction really does matter a lot. And you sort of alluded to that in the last part, where it's when everybody is getting the enhancement, it's great. And for us, it changes how we design programs, who we recruit, and how we measure success. Um, Something that has come up for us is, the work is really relational, and tutoring works not just because of the academic content, but also the caring adult that is working alongside the child. And we've seen that, you don't necessarily have to be a expert teacher on day one. But we do see that tutors need strong preparation and coaching and a clear sense of purpose. And so that recruitment pipeline matters just as much as the curriculum. I'm curious, from what you've seen nationally through writing the book and studying all the districts, where are the districts finding their tutors today, and what are the preparation models that seem to work best in practice?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the most exciting parts of the tutoring story is that it turns out almost anybody can be a great tutor. And we have had almost anybody be a tutor in the last now 6 years. We have had high school students, college students, graduate students, other young adults, retired teachers, current teachers, retirees more generally, stay-at-home moms. I mean, really, like the list could go on. And I think that the key, right, is around that there needs to be training and clear materials, and the programs differ. Also, by the way, we have a lot of wonderful tutoring happening using paraprofessionals, and that's something I think is also has tremendous potential. These are folks who are already working in schools, many of whom are interested in developing into classroom teachers, and there's a lot of wonderful work going on to create pipelines for those folks. And some of those programs I've seen, for example, are fairly scripted, right? So if you have a fairly scripted program, especially again around sort of early literacy, early numeracy, then a lot of people can use it with more minimal training. You have some programs like Teacher America launched a tutoring program called TFA Ignite as a COVID response that recruits college students. They get about 10 hours or so of training before working as virtual tutors, and usually a 10-week session, like 4 days a week. But part of the TFA model, I think, that has made it work is that they actually also pay a school staff member to essentially sort of mentor and supervise these virtual college tutors. So every tutor will have this staff person will actually sort of visit a virtual tutoring session, provide them with some feedback, but they're paid for their time as part of the tutoring model. So I think that there's lots of different folks. I am excited about the paraprofessionals, and I think it's great because I think pipeline to teacher is something that I'm generally interested in. So where we can overlap tutoring with pipeline to teacher, that feels like a real win-win. And the other area around this is with college students or with other young adults. I think that a lot of college students are looking for opportunities, frankly, to earn some money. Virtual tutoring works wonderfully for them because then they can choose, okay, this semester, I know exactly when my classes are. So I can agree and commit to a job where I'm tutoring virtually 4 days a week at the same time every day because I know it works in my schedule. And what we're starting to see is that when you give young people the opportunity to interact in an educational setting in a positive way, they start thinking, hey, maybe this is something I'd like to do, maybe forever, maybe for a few years. I know for Teacher America, that now is significant. I think maybe almost 10% of new Teacher America teachers started as tutors. It's become a tremendous pipeline, and that was never the idea. The idea was just to get more tutors to kids because of COVID, right? So I think all of this is to say that, and I think the other really untapped area is parents. I think there are opportunities to give parents the way to tutor their own kid. Now, not every parent wants to tutor their own kid. Like I've got 3 kids and my relationship with all of them is different. And I'll tell you right now, I will never tutor my 13-year-old daughter. I love her to pieces, but that is not a good match. And I already know that. But some parents want to sit with their kids and feel like they're going to, help guide them, especially on that early learning stuff. And I love the work you're doing. I think it's so important. And when there's surveys of parents of preschool age kids, like your age group, and you ask them, how important is it that you read to your kid? We know that 96% of those parents will say it's really important. And you can imagine that they might be interested in what else could help inspire learning. I'll also say that when you ask those same parents how important is it that you do early math activities with their kids, 44% of them will say that it's very important, and only half of those will say they feel equipped to do it. So I think we have a
Wow.
ton of work to do of how to give parents skills, especially with the kind of age group that you're working with. And I couldn't agree more that early is better.
Crystal, you have another question you want to pose?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll Johnny, we'll put you in the on deck circle, Johnny.
That's great. The other question I would ask is just about as you think about the implementation of work, and I think John covered in this a little bit, but how are you seeing just the impact or the research in not just who can become a caring adult, but also, or who can become a caring tutor, but also what research suggests, excuse me, in how often the gaps are between effective tutoring and what you're seeing and what's actually being implemented on the ground. So, what gaps do you see there and what could we be learning so that, all the programs that are supporting kids are continuing to be just of the highest quality?
Sure. So, I mean, look, some of the biggest critiques of the tutoring that we've seen is that almost none of the tutoring that has happened in real life has matched the kind of outcomes that we have seen from the best randomized controlled trials that have happened. So people will say, well, okay, therefore it doesn't work, or it's disappointing, or all these different factors. But I actually don't think that's the takeaway. I think the takeaway is that implementation is really hard and that we have to think about a lot of these different pieces. I think that, when I have this other document open on I'm a 2-monitor person. I have this other document open here where I've listed like every piece of data that I have in the book about any school or district and what they told me they learned. And none of these are randomized controlled trials. And some of these have been written up and a lot of them haven't. But all of them have positive outcomes that are like 60% of kids did better, 70% of kindergarteners outpaced, the growth. All of these different pieces. One piece of data that I love came from a survey, speaking of out of school time, that came from the New Jersey Tutoring Corps, asked kids, they asked the kids at the end of this was a summer school program that involved tutoring, and 82% of kids said they are more likely to participate in math class now. So when I think about the work that you're doing and I think about what excites me about tutoring, it's not just that I want kids to do better. I want in this country for there to be a stronger culture of learning. I want kids to love learning and to care and to be okay asking for help. It's not all about getting A's on the report card. It's about the journey of learning. And I think that these relationships, and that's why I'm totally bullish on human tutoring. And we can talk about AI and where it can come into the picture, but I am totally bullish on human tutoring. Education is a human endeavor at its core. And what young people across America need from everywhere that I've seen tutoring is they are hungry for meaningful relationships with adults that get them excited about their life and their education. And so to me, it's like, yes, we can talk about where very real stuff, and it matters when you're spending money, that the results don't match the ideal results. But I still see positive outcomes happening almost everywhere that I've been. And I think that some of those positive outcomes are in these kind of engagement dividends. I want the real outcomes too, 100%. I want these kids doing better math and reading, but I also want them to be in it. And I think we're starting to see that.
Yeah, we're exploring the high school pipeline. It's been very interesting to see the connection. And I think not only what it's doing for the littles, but also what that means to share knowledge for the high schoolers too. So thank you so much. This is great.
Love
I'm so
that.
glad you wrote this book.
Love that. I love that, Crystal. Thanks so much. On the high schooler thing, there's an interesting program out of Jacksonville called USA Reads that has done really good work with high school students and treated it not really as volunteering, but as work. So there's this work experience, there's this learning experience, very powerful experience for the high school students, and it seems to work great for the little kids as well. I screwed up. I said Johnny was on deck, but I was wrong. I had the batting order wrong. So Sherry's up, but now I got it fouled up. So I'm going to give Sherry a second, and I'm gonna pop in a question while Sherry gets ready. Hey Sherry, thanks for sorry about that. We talked a little bit fleetingly about math, and math is becoming an increasingly important concern. I'm curious whether you've observed any difference between early, let's stay with the early stuff, not the algebra. That's my problem. I got to worry about algebra again someday. But start with the early stuff. Um, is there a difference between what goes on in math tutoring and what goes on in reading tutoring?
Well, in the reading tutoring, they're reading. No, look,
Don't make me
so
out to be the dope I am.
um,
There was a question.
so
There was a question
yes,
from the
I.
audience
This is
about
what I'll
math
say.
tutoring. Is this different?
Is it different? I think we have seen, I think so far to date, we've seen much more early literacy tutoring than math tutoring. And I
Hmm.
think that's happened for a couple reasons, which are totally, to me, understandable.
Yep.
The first is that it is simply easier to recruit tutors to tutor early reading
Oh,
because
okay.
it's just whether you're paid or volunteer or whatever, it's just easier. Almost everyone who wants to tutor knows how to read themselves.
Fair.
We have a big issue in this country that too many people think they are not math people, and that would include them being able to do very early math. So it's harder to staff math tutoring is one piece of it.
Yep.
I also think that it is connected to the fact, the science of reading movement, and that over these same last 5 years, we've seen such an emphasis. Dozens and dozens of states. I think we're over 43 states now have passed legislation on science of reading. So there's sort of been a natural emphasis on understanding the urgency behind reading, which means if you're only going to pick one, like it just kind of makes sense. It's a little bit easier and it's the topic we've all been talking about. But
Gotcha.
absolutely, math is now about to have its turn. So, lots
Gotcha.
to do there.
Gotcha. Sherry, thanks for joining.
Hi. Hi. Thank
As
you.
you're
It's my
going to
pleasure.
tell us a little bit about Read United for a second, and then have at Liz. Ask her
Well,
your
hello.
question.
Thank you so
Hello.
much for allowing me to join you. Um, Greetings from United Way of Central Georgia here in Macon, Georgia. We offer a Read United program, and it is a grade level reading program. We service students in grades K through 3. We partner with AARP Experience Corps to provide a structured tutoring sessions for our children. They are one-on-one sessions or small group, and we utilize reading support materials. Our volunteers are trained, like I said, through the ARP Experience Corps model for tutoring, and they tutor 1 hour a week throughout the school year, the same tutor with the same students, and we generally tutor 2 to 3 times a week.
Awesome. Thanks for that overview. And of course, I'm happy to hear somebody from Experience Corps. That's great. Um, so you have a question for Liz?
I do. So when you talk about the results that the different programs are getting, what is the data saying, and how are districts or tutoring partners using that data to close the gap and to accelerate what the students are getting?
So, there's a few ways to think about it. Like, one is that I think that places that are really focused on implementation are seeing actually that they're getting year on year better returns. And I think the District of Columbia is really the best example of this. So DC they went big on tutoring with a lot of their ESSER money. What they did was they actually stood up a separate nonprofit that would handle a lot of the contracting, so that they set up contracts with a bunch of different providers and then worked with schools and districts to do matchmaking to help you figure out, okay, based on what you want to do, right? Like, here's the tutoring partner that probably makes the most sense, and we're going to help you with some of the implementation. So at the same time, DC actually back to math, right? So DC has been really focused on math for the last couple years. They have been, right, they did a whole new math curriculum. They've been doing a ton of teacher PD on math. So like this isn't just about tutoring, right? It's also about math. But in the tutoring side, what they saw was 2 years ago, the kids who were getting math tutoring, after about 15 to 20 weeks of tutoring across the school year, they gained about 2 additional months of math, which I think is pretty good for like a couple times a week tutoring. 2 months is a lot of months if it's like a quarter of a school year. But last year, in the same tutoring program with the same amount of tutoring, the kids in the program got 3 months of math because they think, right? We don't totally know the mechanisms of this, why it's working, but I think, and I think the folks in DC think that it's all building on each other. They're getting really good at implementation and understanding who should tutor and what they should work on. And because there's more consistency what's happening in the classroom, the kids are better able to leverage the tutoring and the classroom time. And so the tutoring, you get more from it. So that's like one finding that I think really excites me about the future of tutoring, that districts aren't just saying, hey, we kind of figured this out and we're getting okay results a couple months. They're saying we can keep getting better at this and we're not going to stop until we see those kinds of results. So like, is it great that, like I'm looking at, so like another school, okay, so in Odessa, Texas, 50% of students who are below grade level, this was in 2022, and they got 20 hours of tutoring total over the year. Then they were on grade level the next year. Well, that's awesome. But what about the other 50%? But every district I've met with and talked to, like they're totally focused on the other 50%. So whether that's they need just more tutoring, we got to pay attention to the classroom, all of these pieces, I think really matter. But there's a lot of data, at play generally about like how we know, and the way these programs work best is when the tutoring programs are seeing the same data that the teacher is seeing, right? Because fundamentally part of what makes tutoring really work is that you get more kids on grade level so that the teacher can actually do her job, which is to deliver a lesson plan to a group of students who are all ready to learn the same material. So you want all that data to really have feedback. And that is really what we're seeing in the places that are having the most success.
So do you see different impacts and different dosages and different size groups or other differences in the tutoring program or approaches? For example, do you get a greater return if you have a one-on-one tutor as opposed to 3 or 4? So talk to me a little bit about what is the best approach with that.
Best is relative to what you've got and what you can afford. Sure. There was a study that came out in the fall that showed that you are going to get better returns on a one-on-one tutoring than even a two-on-one tutoring, which is like kind of makes sense, right? Because Sherry, if you're tutoring me, like I'm getting all of your attention. Right. And if I'm stumbling, you're going to always know, and I'm going to benefit. One of the biggest differences is that if you're tutoring now me and John, even if our problems are similar, there's just more talking. So a little bit more of the time in each session goes to talking as opposed to tutoring. And then that kind of adds up. It's not nefarious. It's just like human nature. And obviously if I'm involved, I'm talking the whole time and it's problematic. So there you go. But so we do see that one-on-one is going to be better than two-on-one and so forth. One of the reasons I actually am really excited about virtual tutoring, again, is because of the tools that are being built to help us even better analyze and understand exactly what's happening during a tutoring session. So there's really cool stuff happening where there are these tools that can analyze every word that we're saying and actually be able to say, okay, Sherry, you need to call on John. John hasn't done enough. Liz has been dominating. She won't shut up. So John, you need to read the next section. And so these are the kinds of, like when I think about the AI tools I'm really excited about, these are the ones that support the tutor in using that time ever more effectively. Because I think, more from hot take corner, like one of the things we've screwed up the most is time in the school day. We just divided it into blocks. And then we said, if we make the block longer, kids will learn more. And we really didn't put a ton of time into like what was going to happen in those blocks. And tutoring is giving us an opportunity to rethink that time and then instead say, what if we take a small amount of time and we try to make it as effective and efficient and engaging as possible? And what could that, one of my like crazy aspirational ideas I said in the book is like, what if we all got so good at tutoring that we could take back time and have two recesses? Raise your hand if you would love for your first graders to have two recesses. And wouldn't that make learning better? Hi, show me a teacher who disagrees. So this is like the kind of stuff I'm really excited about, is like getting really into the data, and the virtual platforms actually really help with that.
That's so interesting. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Those were great questions, and that was really interesting. We're going to transition to Johnny, but as we do, um, let me ask you this. Somebody posted a question about the interaction of tutoring and mentoring, and you were talking about the human part. And I will just say, from my experience, core experience, often what was happening was less transactional and technical and more human. Like Liz wasn't reading not because Liz didn't know how to read, but because other things were standing in the way. And the presence of a trusted, caring adult, as Crystal suggested, actually just unlocked your natural capacity to learn. So tell us what you think about the what's mentoring, what's tutoring, and how do they overlap or how do they touch?
Yeah, I think ideally the best tutoring is inherently also mentoring, right? Not all mentoring is tutoring, but I think all great tutoring is mentoring. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Hmm.
Because I do think that I just all those things that you said, that we all want, I mean, we're human. We want to be seen. We want someone to know our story. I remember I was interviewing a college student who was in doing this TFA program. So she's tutoring virtually. She's working every day with these two first grade students in a charter school in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And she said that the thing that surprised her most was how much these kids were willing to share about their personal lives, including some really complicated stuff. One of them lost a member of her immediate family and wanted to talk about it during the tutoring session. And to be honest, the college student was a little bit taken aback of like, am I supposed to know this? I mean, she did everything right. She emailed the teacher and she made sure someone else knew and they knew. But the idea that like this is what I mean about how kids and young people in America are hungry for meaningful relationships with adults. And this is it's just not remotely a ding on teachers. I want to be so clear, but teachers don't have the time to have these conversations with 30 kids in a given day. Our young people want to share their life. They want to know. I mean, these kids will Google the crap. Like if you're virtual tutoring with them, let's say you even only have like your first name initial, like John G. You can talk. I've talked to teachers in these schools. They're like, we catch the kids Googling John G. Tutor. They're like really want to know stuff, or they really want to know like, do you have a boyfriend and what are you going to do when you grow up, and all of these things. And by the way, I mean, another cool thing I think about some of the college student tutoring is I was in a school in DC that was using college students. One of the students is a student at a college in California. So she literally is outside with palm trees in the background. And these kids in this school in like downtown DC are getting to like interact with someone who's at college in California. Do you know how cool they thought that was?
That's
I mean, these
fantastic.
are fifth graders. They thought it was so cool. And so I just think like I do think the relation is part of it. I think kids want to see the world. I think they want to be seen by the world. And I think that tutoring helps with that.
Awesome. Awesome. Johnny, tell us a little bit about Mid-South literacy and literacy Mid-South, and then have at it with a couple of questions for Liz.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I am Johnny Blunt, Director of Collaborative Action at Literacy Mid-South. We are just celebrated our 50th year, which is super exciting, and we provide literacy supports and resources for learners across the lifespan. So we do that through direct service, through capacity building of our community partners, and through systems change at a sort of collaborative action level. But today I'm talking about our direct service, our tutoring. We could just go to the next slide. Our main tutoring program is Tutor 901. This started from that sort of windfall of ESSER funds and the Tennessee push for tutoring that Liz talks about in the book, which was exciting to see. We have a very strong program that has continued despite those ESSER dollars sort of going away now. But we have wonderful tutor program managers who have cohorts of schools as well as tutors across the city of Memphis, as well as in Millington. We have worked with over 4,000 kids from 2022 to 2025. And like Liz has talked about a little bit, right? We've really seen that teacher pipeline potential of tutoring work. And we also see that the tutors we recruit are representative of the diversity of Memphis, especially when we think about ages and sort of like, is it just college students? No, it's retired people. It's people who sort of piece together their work through sort of the gig economy in different ways, because we're able to offer flexible schedule, part-time work, and the training that makes almost anybody a great tutor. So our sessions, of course, are high impact, that 3-to-1 ratio with 45 minutes per session 3 times a week. And then our other tutoring opportunity is actually in its pilot year, and that is Literacy Core. It is connected with AmeriCorps. We work in after school and summer programs, so I was excited to hear you talk about that, Liz, through our community partners, and they are actually tutoring the same kids one-on-one through the after school time into the summer, because those kids are regular attendees of that program, both their after school and summer program. So it's a really exciting opportunity to get really long-term relationships built with tutors, and that is using Reading Partners curriculum.
Awesome.
But that is a really quick run through of the Literacy
Great.
at South's elementary tutoring.
Fantastic.
Liz,
you got
yeah.
questions for Liz?
Of course, yes. Liz, I've really enjoyed your book. I have to say that your writing style is very engaging as well. So even though some people might think tutoring is a dry topic, although probably not anybody on this call, your writing is very engaging. But I really am interested, just based on the history of our program and sort of thinking about the state of Tennessee, in your thoughts around the state's role in, scaling tutoring, making it possible for whole districts to take on. Memphis and Shelby County is a gigantic school district, and it is hard to sort of do this at scale. And when I think about the state's role, I think about it 2 ways, right? I think about the legislative role of the state and the sort of potential there, but then also the Department of Education and sort of what you've seen about the ways that those institutions can work.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of opportunity for the state to play a really helpful role, which we are seeing in some places. I think in the initial sort of post-COVID years, it sort of took a minute for states to figure out like, what are we doing? And I have worked at a state education agency, and we are proudly the most overlooked, least sexy, but yet very vital part of the education infrastructure. But I think that now there's a few things like, again, so I think it's about incentivizing. If you want, you can incentivize tutoring to be the district response when you have kids that are struggling, right? So you could think about how to design, whether that's your accountability system or your school improvement plans or all of those pieces. Like there's ways to incentivize using different kinds of funding opportunities. For example, if you want people to be doing tutoring, that is a great way to do it. I think, again, I already mentioned Louisiana, but I think Louisiana is an incredible example of a state that like kind of went like 0 to 60 almost overnight. They put $30 million into the state budget from the legislature the last 2 years. They're on track to have tutored something like 240,000 kids this year by making tutoring the response. If you are behind, you get tutored. And they have done a lot of work about like, what does that tutoring look like and who are the partners and all those pieces. And I will say a smaller piece of the pie in Louisiana, but they've also have a separate piece of legislation that funds something called the Steve Carter Tutoring Program, which is essentially a tutoring voucher that you can be eligible for, again, if you are below grade level on certain exams. And it gives the parents $1,500 to be able to procure from a list of approved tutoring vendors after school, back to my out of school time, after school, out of school time tutoring. And they're also seeing some real success on that. And there's some really interesting models there. There's one, the biggest provider is when they actually hire teachers, but you never would be tutoring your own students. So you're tutoring other students from your school in an after school setting and getting paid. They pay very well, like $80 to $100 an hour, because they're like, we want to get the best teachers. And we find that, we get these teachers and this is how this works. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, for the SEA to think about incentivizing and also to help with definition. What is good tutoring? All the definitional stuff that, we said at the beginning, like you can enshrine a lot of that into policy or regulation or just documents of like, here's what great tutoring looks like. And I would also say almost every state has a district or at least a handful of schools that have done great work with tutoring. And I would shine a light on those. Like, shine the spotlight on what works. That is actually what most people want to know. Like, we don't want to talk about the stuff that doesn't work and fight about whatever. Let's talk about what does work and then, help people derive optimism and ideas and creativity from the things that work. And so I think there's a lot that states can do in that vein. So like, how can the state hold up the work you're doing in Memphis to show other counties, or your smaller, more rural counties or whatever, this is what this looks like. And are there opportunities to, restructure any funds or anything like that to incentivize tutoring if that's what the SEA wants to do?
Awesome. Let me just do a quick time check here. We've got 15 minutes to go. We still want to hear from Kelly. We will have our poll up shortly. So Johnny, one more quick question. Kelly, you're on deck, and we'll be with you in just a second. And folks, keep posting the questions. I'm watching them, and we'll try to get them in. So Johnny, back to you.
Yeah, Liz. So I'm the director of collaborative action. I sort of talked about that systems change kind of thinking. I was so interested in the city tutor DC model that you talked about in the book. So we have a Shelby County early literacy plan. One of those priorities is creating some type of community-wide tutoring initiative to recruit tutors, assign tutors, and literally that sounds like exactly what they're doing, except it's coming out of the city, sort of creating a nonprofit spinoff. I'm just so interested in that. So anything else you can share about what you learned there would be very helpful.
Sure. I mean, I think that one of the smartest things that DC did was that they brought in as the first and now still executive director is this woman, Kat Peretti, who had been in DC already for a long time. So again, back to this, like the thing about we said in the beginning about how did the movement happen is that you need trusted leadership. And so I think part of what really helped City Tutor, which is now rebranded to City Schools Collaborative, as they're trying to kind of figure out their long-term sustainability plan, those staying core to tutoring and staffing and other things, is that they had a leader who was already trusted in the system. She came from the SEA and has just been an incredible visionary for what this can look like for schools in DC. So I think that systems really matter and leadership matters tremendously. And I'm happy to connect you with her offline. You'd probably love talking to her.
That's great. Fantastic. Johnny, thanks so much. Thanks, Liz. Kelly, I'm sorry it took a while to get to you, but here we are. And thanks for hanging with us. Kelly Sawyer is with the United Ways of Iowa. So, Kelly, you want to give us a quick little picture of United Ways of Iowa and then pose a question or two to Liz?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on today. So, United Ways of Iowa manages an AmeriCorps grant, and we deliver Iowa Reading Corps, which Reading Corps is actually a program that was developed out of Impact in Minnesota, and we are considered a replication site. And so this is a high impact tutoring program that is delivered to students in grades kindergarten through third that are provided in either a one-on-one or a pair setting. Students receive 20 minutes of tutoring per day. And on average in Iowa, we are seeing 60 to 100 minutes delivered per week. And we serve districts across the state. Doesn't matter where you are, if you're in public school, private school, it doesn't matter. Wherever students have the need, we are available to serve. And currently this year, we are serving students in 17 districts, actually 37 buildings across the state. And so our tutors are AmeriCorps members, so they are really there to provide service in our communities. They receive comprehensive training on the literacy interventions that are to be delivered to our students in the school setting. We also are able to recruit volunteers, I would say a number of community members serve because they're really interested in giving back in their community. And it's a great opportunity to help young learners. But we also see tutors from across the age spectrum. So from right out of high school to those retired individuals. The cute thing is we had a couple who were retired and they served the maximum amount of years they could at the time with AmeriCorps, which was 4. And they have license plates, Tutor 1 and Tutor 2. They were that committed to providing the service in their community. I think a benefit to this program is that it is delivered through a multi-tiered coaching approach. So we have a coach in the school building that is somebody identified within the school district to be that lead. And then we also have a coaching specialist that is somebody that we provide to the school district. And that is really somebody there to help guide that tutor, provide those fidelity checks. We assure that fidelity or that the interventions are delivered with fidelity. And also just to monitor that we have the students meeting their goals and the interventions are correct to their learning at that time. So my question, Liz, to you, which thank you for letting me sit in on this, and I've appreciated the conversation. It's just been really turning wheels in my head. But a question that I have is, after studying your 10,000 school districts and the tutoring initiatives, what was a single assumption, maybe I'll say common mistake, maybe, that most policymakers and school leaders still get wrong about how tutoring actually works?
Such a good question.
Well,
Such a good question.
the answer is that too many still think it's a switch that can be flipped. And everyone here already knows that this is not how it works, because it's humans and it's human behavior and it's implementation. So there is no switch that can be flipped to go turn tutoring on. Now, we've really shortened the process and we know so much more about how to get it up and going really quickly. But I think that there is an assumption that you can just say tutoring and you will go. And that is why, unfortunately, we see some states who still will say, we do tutoring. All students have access to this on-demand tutoring program, to which I would say that is not what we're talking about when we're talking about high dosage, high impact tutoring that's structured in a way and aligned to curriculum. Like that is, you're offering something else. So there's a switch flipping, and there's sort of this idea that all tutoring is tutoring, or all tutoring is great tutoring. And so I think those things together, which I get it. I mean, we all want to believe in the shortcut and the silver bullet. And I think that, if I don't know. I was thinking about this when you were just talking about your thing. I was like, how can you not hear these stories about these people and feel great about this country? I just do. I think that this movement is filled with like so many people who believe that kids deserve better and want to help them and do more and do things differently. And it's thousands of people across the country. And I just think it's so important and phenomenal that everyone understands that this is happening in tiny pockets in every state and community. And we just have to keep spreading the word that it's not easy and you can't just switch the flip, but it can be done, that our kids deserve it, that our, older folks want to contribute in this way, that our college students are ready for the challenge. And there's so much work to be done, but you can't hear all the work that you guys are all doing every day and not feel like, okay, like, let's go do it.
Awesome. Kelly, you have another thought, question?
Yeah. I mean, and I think and a lot because of just what we hear across the state of how tutoring is being delivered. We love our program and we are amazed by the results. And so if districts could get one thing right when they are designing a tutoring program, based on your research, what do you think that would be? And what evidence convinced you of that?
I mean, I think one piece is I would like them to build in this idea that the first year is probably going to be kind of bumpy and you might not get good results. I think that one of the greatest gifts of the ESSER funding for the tutoring movement was that it really gave places who were using it for tutoring like a 3-year runway to screw up, to get some crummy results that in other contexts would have immediately gotten that program axed. And so I think if there's one lesson from all of this work of the last 5 years, it's that you got to give yourself the runway for it to be imperfect. And that first year is going to be rough because it just is. And you're going to have to move things around and figure it out. You got to have someone, again, I said this earlier, but you got to have someone who it's a big part of their job to oversee it and understand that you're going to have to focus on implementation. It's going to take more than 1 year to get it right. And you want to get the kind of, political cover to have that time.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks. That was great. We're going to close out in a second, but Liz, that was such a spectacular speech and all that enthusiasm about tutoring. And one of the things that you said when we talked before was that observing all this tutoring made you think some thoughts about maybe we ought to be doing this whole education venture somewhat differently. So as a closing thought, tell us what you saw and what it made you think, because I think people will be really fascinated by that.
Well, I mean, I think I've hinted at some of it.
You hinted. I want
That
you to be explicit about it now.
I think there's real opportunities to rethink the school day, what we do during school, who gets to interact with kids. And I think that there's just opportunities to bring more community into the classroom, to, again, not let kids just go on from grade to grade without having that foundational knowledge. And to really say, like, what do we want kids to be getting out of school? To go back, this is back to my hot take corner about time. Like, you little kids need more time to play. The research on this is abundant. And all you have to do is look at the, rapid rise in things like ADHD diagnoses to know that we are not thinking right about how little kids learn. There's huge progress being made right now in the learning sciences, really starting to marry what we understand about how the brain works and what great learning environments look like. And I think that there's just really an opportunity for us all to say, like, I think we could build a world that we all want, one in which teachers feel fulfilled, they get to do the parts of the job that they like, that there's tons of other adults involved in a kid's life. And it doesn't always have to be at school. If we're getting into the out of school time space, like, I want kids walking down the street to the library, right? And then imagine, I think about this, like my 77-year-old retired father, if I could get him to the library twice a week to like read with some little kids, busy break from his like tennis and bridge playing, like that would be amazing for him and for them and for all these other kids who might not get to have grandparents the way that my kids do, right? Like all of these opportunities to build not just the education and the academic framework, but to build the community framework that's really going to let our communities and our neighborhoods and our towns thrive. I really think like tutoring lets us revisit all of the big assumptions about education, how long it takes to learn something, who has to be involved with it, all of these different things. And I think that it's time that we rethink some of these big questions, because we need American kids to learn more and do better. And we need the adults in their lives to be willing to try something different. And we hear such discontent in the education sector. So I kind of think the adults should be on board with trying something different. And we know the kids are up for it because, they love their tutoring. I mean, there's a study in DC of middle school kids were more likely to attend school on the day they knew they had a session with their tutor than on the days they didn't. You tell me something else that gets a middle schooler to want to go to school, and like, I will go write a book about that.
Liz, that was fantastic. Just so interesting, useful, and fun. I got a text, I have to say, from somebody who's watching who said, I want Liz to be my next door neighbor. That was marvelous. Kelly, Johnny, Crystal, Sherry, thank you all for joining and for your questions today. Thank you to everybody in the audience for hanging in and for posting some really great questions. I think we got to a whole bunch of them. That was a terrific session. And Sierra, if you could put up the slide of what's coming. I just want to say thanks to everybody for being here. And again, thanks to Liz for writing this book. And here it is again. Go get it. And for sharing some time with us and some thoughts with us. With that, I wish you all a good afternoon. Take a look at the upcoming sessions. And remember, we will send out a link. So if you think others should watch this, you'll have a link soon that will allow them to do that. Thanks so much, and a good afternoon to everybody.